Gold back below 1,500. Is this the final pullback that we've been expecting? The 10-year, not so coincidentally, has moved from the 1.42 level to 1.97, flirting with 2%. That hasn't happened in a while. The Dow and the major U.S. indices, meanwhile, continue to make new highs. Boeing has gotten off easy. We've meant to talk about them a couple of times, and they're criminal. I'm going to try to curse less on this podcast because a good friend of mine told me I should. So yeah, we're going to talk about their fuckery and all the stuff that they've been doing. We're going to talk about the largest study on school shooters since Columbine and the great insights that were delivered to us by our Secret Service, vape lung diseases, dueling dinosaurs, and long-term data storage. This is Gerardo Del Real along with my co-host, Mr. Nick Hodge. This is Bizarro World, episode 43, fresh from New Orleans. Nick, how are you, sir?
I only know a little bit about a tiny bit of that stuff you just mentioned. And if I'm being honest, I missed the first 20 seconds because I was having technical difficulty that I was able to figure out during your intro. So I hope you did a good intro.
No worries. We'll see, good, bad. It's all subjective, right? I felt okay about it. Let's talk New Orleans. We were fortunate enough to be invited by Mr. Brian London to present again. You were extremely busy. You moderated a panel. You had a presentation in the main ballroom. You had a tour. You had the presentation with me for Bizarro World. We did the podcast live. That was an absolute blast. Had a good opportunity to catch up with companies that we are familiar with, and we got to kick the tires on a few new companies. So I'd love to get your take now that we've had a week or so to kind of process it on what you saw there, and then we'll talk gold here in just a bit.
Some of the things that were obvious that we touched on, I think, in the podcast that we did live from New Orleans was just the temperament of the crowd and the larger size of the crowd than there has been in previous years. And that's to be expected with the gold price finally breaking out to what was 6-year highs at the time. It's pulled back a bit. We'll talk about that. The younger age of the crowd. So... after I get my talk in the ballroom, I go and sit in Brian London's Gold Club room that, people pay to ask questions to the writers one-on-one or to the...
Because you're fancy, Nick, because you're fancy.
One-on-one. No. And there was a gentleman in there who was younger than I am, in his early 30s that had made some money in real estate and sort of saw the writing on the wall for broad-based equities and debt levels and interest rates, all the things that we talk about and why natural resources, precious metals specifically, are due for a bull market. And he was just asking all the right questions. And then you led a walking tour as well, Gerardo, and I got to talk to, I believe it was the brother and sister that came along. He's also my age, 34, 35 years old, is a realtor in Montana, and they had been there for the second year in a row doing due diligence, realize it's time to get invested a bit more heavily in precious metals, and we're trying to come up with good ideas to do that. So
shout out to Mr. and Miss Miles, by the way, brother and sister, I believe, but they were awesome to hang out with. They'd been there. She had been there this was her second year, if I'm not mistaken. I believe this was his first year, but they were a blast. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to shout them out because they emailed. Graham actually emailed and was asking about the podcast, and he wanted to make sure that he was subscribed for it. So Graham, it was an awesome time, and it was great chatting with you, and thanks for joining us in our tour of 5. He won some gold coins, or some silver coins, I should say. Back to your points. Apologies.
And he offered me the opportunity to hunt on some acreage that he has access to in Montana, so instantly won my heart as well. So we talked about the more people there, the younger people there, the I guess better attitude. What I did see, and it's a question that I repeatedly come back to, is what's the catalyst for all this? And there was a gentleman in our workshop who asked a bunch of questions about this after we got done recording the podcast. But it's like, everybody knows, right? It's like everybody knows the emperor has no clothes. Everybody knows about the wizard behind the curtain. Everybody knows about the debt levels and the negative interest rates and the depletion of reserves. And, I heard it 100 times from presenters at the conference, and I read about it every day. Ray Dalio was writing about it again this week, about how there's so much cheap paper chasing these assets, and how there's so much cheap money that venture capitalists are just funding and funding and funding what they think are unicorns, but that don't make any money. And in some cases, these unicorns, tech unicorns, are saying, "Look, we don't need any more money," and the venture capitalists are saying, "Fuck you! You're going to take more money, or we're going to fund your competitors." And he's just talking about how it's a ticking time bomb, but no one knows. And I guess if you know you're a billionaire, you're much smarter than I am. It's like, when does the countdown on that ticking time bomb hit zero?
Point well taken. Point well taken. I'll say this. The Fed's balance sheet has increased $300 billion in less than 2 months, right? If repo funding continues at this pace, the January 2015 high will be taken out by late February at the latest. So that's $800 billion of what the Fed wants to tell me is non-QE stimulus in 6 months. It's the quickest pace since QE1 in 2009. And that comes from Bianco Research, Mr. Jim Bianco. And so we're back to expanding balance sheets. We're back to supporting asset classes that require people to be in the markets. It's not a coincidence that we're hitting all-time highs in the major U.S. indices the way we said would happen, right? It's not a coincidence that the 10-year is trickling up. The interesting thing about it is how long the central banks will be able to get away with it this time around, because the interest to service the debt just in the U.S., let's be U.S. centric for a quick second. You made a good point earlier today in your Wall Street Underground letter, that under Wall Street's Underground Profits letter, that the interest just to service the debt next year will outpace all of the other spending that we have, right? Military spending, defense and non-defense spending. And so it can't continue. Something has to give, and it will. I responded to that gentleman by stating what I've believed for the past 3 years, that we're going to have a bond blow up out of Europe before anything else really moves, because they are the dirtiest dirty shirt in the central bank laundry basket, and I think the U.S. is the cleanest dirty shirt. But regardless of what it is, it's going to hit the fan here soon, and I think that 2020 is going to be an absolutely spectacular time to be speculating in the gold space, in the gold juniors. I mentioned during the live podcast in New Orleans that there would be a lot of volatility. The gentleman that asked the point, what's going to be the catalyst, had a great point to me afterwards privately. Fascinating gentleman, by the way. We had a great conversation at the closing reception, but he had a good point. He said, well, when you say volatility, what does that mean? You should define that. And I said, that's an excellent point, and I'll make it a point to do it during the next podcast. What I mean is, I think you're going to see a hockey stick of a U.S. stock market with foreign capital coming into the U.S. and the market going parabolic. This is the most hated bull market that I've been around for the major U.S. indices, because underlying economic growth and wage disparity, it doesn't make sense, right, for the stock market to be where it's at. But it's being supported by all of this cash, and there's a lot more cash supporting that market now that the Fed has decided to step in and expand its balance sheet. And so I say all that to say, volatility means $100 to $200 moves in the gold price to the upside, then $100 back, then another two. I think this is going to be a weekly phenomenon in 2020. That's my rant on that.
It's incredible that the Fed has just gone back to doing what it was doing in the teeth of the financial crisis 10 years ago. And it's almost no one is talking about it, right? I mean, the numbers I read, you just cited some there, but they said they were going to spend something like $60 billion just through the end of this month, which is like 3 weeks away. And then they were going to continue with that through June 2020. So in my mind, like you say, it's hundreds of billions of dollars. And that's just buying the treasury bills. That's separate from the repurchase agreement market.
Agreed. No, agreed. I think, again, you talk about Bizarro World. I said it in New Orleans. I think it's the most appropriately named podcast in the history of podcasts for what we do for a living, right? We make our living opining on the junior resource space. You make your living not just in the junior resource space, but, in tech and crypto and cannabis and frankly, wherever the opportunity is. And you've done very well for your subscribers and your followers and your readers and for yourself. So, our job is to look at these trends and try to get ahead of them. In my case, I'm notoriously early. The things that made sense to me in 2016 are finally starting to play out. If you've been a subscriber of mine for the last 2 or 3 years, you've made some money on some plays, but you've also lost some money just like I have. I've lost right alongside with you on a lot of the plays that to me are no-brainers. Companies with market caps of $2, $3, $4 million that have assets that far exceed that, and management teams that know how to navigate through a bear market. Nobody cares right now, right? So it's interesting times. It's a bizarro world. We speak a lot about societal issues and things of those sorts on the podcast, but remove all of that. If we're just looking at the markets, it's a bizarro world in the markets.
That's very true. And so what do you make of the gold price action this week where, we fly home from New Orleans, we're feeling good. Everybody's saying, 1600 is within sight. It's going to go straight up. And then, you like boxing. So that boom, you just get caught with one in the jaw. I'm watching it right now just sink. It's at $1,458 an ounce. You and I talked about some key levels that need to hold. You want to talk about those and just sort of how this, how you feel about this current sell-off in gold prices?
Absolutely. The first thing I'll say is it's overdue. We've been straight up for a few months, and I think the pullback, I thought it would happen in October. I was a few weeks early, beats being a few years early, but I was a few weeks early on that call, and we definitely got it. I had said that as long as we hold the 1474 on the daily, we'd be okay. We'd bounce right back up to that $1,500 mark. Well, we broke through that today, right? And immediately,
sure did.
Yeah, and the minute we did, what happened? The algorithms kicked in, the bots kicked in, and we closed today at 1460. So the next level that I'm watching on a monthly basis, on a closing basis, is 1465. And if we can hold 1465 on a monthly close, then I think we're off to the races again in December. Now, if we do break below 1465, I said it before on the way up, there wasn't a lot from 1374
That's right.
up to 1500. Well, guess what? There's not a lot from 1500 down to 1374, right? It cuts both ways. We can't just enjoy the upside and say, hey, we shot up from 1374 all the way to 1500. There wasn't a lot of resistance. Well, there's not a lot of resistance on the round trip ticket. So those are the levels to watch. We happen to be in an interesting predicament because it's also tax loss selling season. So I know that you've had subscribers write in asking, where are we taking these tax losses? I know you had a couple of sell calls earlier today. I can tell you that I've paid more attention to my portfolio in the past month as far as what I'm getting rid of than I have in the past 6 months because frankly, it's the time to do it. So there's a couple of names in the portfolio that I'm going to be selling for tax loss purposes and reinvesting, that position into other similar companies, albeit ones that have active exploration programs. Going into 2020, the advice that I would give everybody is make sure that if you don't dabble in the producers and the development stage companies, which you should have some of, because they've seen the majority of the gains, frankly, in this rise in the gold price have gone to the producers because of the leverage, right? It makes sense. But the development stage companies and the explorers that I tend to gravitate towards, for the most part, haven't participated. So make sure that you give yourself an opportunity in early 2020, once tax loss season is over and people are replenishing their positions, to enjoy the re-rating up. And so you don't want to be stuck with explorers that are still biding their time, hoping for a better market. I want companies out there that have the ability to raise capital in these markets, not dilute too much in these markets, and that have a question to answer. Meaning, is there a deposit of significance here? Let's go put a drill on it and see what happens and answer that question. It can be no. It's exploration. We all get it. Most of the times it's a no, but I want my subscribers and I want myself to have a shot at a significant win because frankly, when you have a market cap of $2, $5, $10 million, it's not a lot of downside, right? It's been brutal, but the Darwinism nature of it has removed a lot of the downside.
Yeah, and just like there's, not a lot of resistance in the gold price between the prices you just mentioned, there's not a lot of resistance for these junior miners to go up a lot very quickly.
And importantly, if you look at the major U.S. indices, I know it's the most hated bull market ever. There's no resistance overhead for the major U.S. indices, especially with a central bank, a Fed that's coming in and being very vocal about the fact that, hey, stock market, 401ks, don't worry about it. We got you.
And speaking of stocks that have done incredibly well, we got to talk about uranium for a second, um, because well, for a couple of reasons. One, there was a big analyst report out. I'm going to have to find it now in my email, but downgrading stocks this week, basically saying that the bull market has taken longer to materialize than anyone thought it would, and we're cutting the prices on basically our entire nexus of uranium coverage. It was 8 capital,
Yep.
and they cut, for example, let me just pick one. They cut Cameco from a $15 price target to $13. They cut Energy Fuels from a $5.60 price target to $3.55. They cut Fission Energy from $2.30 to $2. And so that's like throwing in the towel, right? That's like the capitulation when the analysts, who are always rosy and who always have higher price targets on these companies that are typically justified, are saying, hey, no, it's time to pull back a little bit, right? And so,
and then what happened? They went up.
Well, they went up a little bit because of you and I discussed this while we were in New Orleans. There was Cameco reported quarterly earnings and had some favorable things to say on their conference call. And by the time you guys are listening to this podcast, right, we always say we record on a Friday. It's out the following Monday, the 10th, which is, I guess, Sunday. We should be getting the guidelines or the framework that the Nuclear Working Group has put together to respond to Section 232, which has now been going on since July. And so, I don't know, just something worth mentioning, right? Those equities in that space. And there's not a lot of them. There's only, you can hold them all in two hands, the amount of quality uranium companies in the world, really. It's something you got to be paying attention to, because that market has to turn as well.
Agreed. And there are whispers, and I hate to engage in whispers, but let's engage in whispers for a little bit. A whisper that I heard in New Orleans with somebody that has, direct to semi-direct knowledge of everything going on behind the scenes mentioned to me that, it could be a scenario where the administration decides to not publicize what the decision is and use the cover of national security as a reason to not do so. He said, however, the administration is being encouraged to give the space a carrot, because let's be honest, a lot of the companies that were directly involved with petitioning for a change of policy, they got their market cap slashed in half when the can was kicked down the road, right? And so you can imagine these companies are lobbying behind the scenes to get something. If you're not going to just outright specify what the recommendations are, then at the very least, let the market and people in the space know that there is firm action being taken, tangible action that you'll see in the market within the next month or two, because I think everybody will understand what that means. And so what I'm hearing is that, they may just decide that they are going to go ahead and allow US-based companies to sell into the market at a predetermined price. Would that be $50? Would that be $60? Well, you would think it has to be at least $50, because not very many companies are making money. Even with ISR projects, they're not making money below $50, right? So it'll be interesting. I think next week is going to be an incredibly interesting week in uranium. Let's hope so. We've had people much smarter than I and you, at least smarter than I, call for a bull market in uranium for the last 6 years, right? So let's hope we get something. I don't think it's a coincidence that the companies that are leveraged to the U.S. have performed pretty well relative to the pullback and the sell-off back a few months ago. So fingers crossed. Let's see what happens on that front.
Well, banks and corporations that don't need money have gotten it from the government in spades for the past 10 years. I'm not really a fan of it, but I suppose if it's going to be for a sector I'm invested in, right, then I'll go along with it.
Agreed. And we should say Happy Veterans Day to all the vets here in the U.S. By the time you listen to this podcast, it'll be Monday. It'll be Veterans Day. I've said a million times that our veterans, our military, and firefighters are the people I have the utmost respect for, just because of how selfless what they do is. So happy Veterans Day to all the vets out there.
Same, and I told my Veterans Day story months ago on this podcast with my neighbor Ollie Knoll, who didn't make it to this Veterans Day. So happy Veterans Day to Ollie Knoll.
I like it. I like it. Absolutely. Well said. What else you got, Mr. Hodge? What do you want to touch on? We touched on the Dow, the 10-year, New Orleans gold, uranium. Do we want to talk about the largest study on school shooters since Columbine?
I think you do. I'm not abreast of the situation, but I'd like to be enlightened.
Spoiler alert, this is where me not cursing too much is going to go out the fucking window. So the U.S. Secret Service dug into almost 50 school shootings. This wasn't a study by your local academic. This wasn't a study by even, a branch of government that doesn't have the resources or the assets to be able to put together a comprehensive report. This was the U.S. Secret Service that did this research, right? And they dug into almost 50 school shootings from the past 10 years. And they've identified some major red flags that could have prevented the tragedies and could stop future ones. I'll put a link to the article. This is how the article started. I said, excellent. I've been waiting for a research paper or a study that delved deeply into, the cause, the profile, all of this. So here's what we get. There's no single profile of a school shooter. They vary in age, gender, race, grade level, and social characteristics. All right, cool. But generally speaking,
It's funny, not funny.
It's funny, not funny. But generally speaking, students who commit school shootings expressed an interest in violence. Ooh, deep dive. They were bullied by their peers. Ooh, deep dive. And they regularly got in trouble at school. So I said, you got to be fucking kidding me, right? This is what you came up with. So I read a little further because I said, okay, maybe I'm being a bit judgmental. Maybe I'm not giving, the article and the study the respect it deserves. This is the U.S. Secret Service that did this, right? So I said, let me read on. So then I get to the part that says, while the researchers were careful to note that there isn't a specific profile of a potential school shooter, they did find a list of warning signs to look for and I got excited. I said, this is where it's going to happen. We're going to get, the in-depth insight that the U.S. Secret Service and its budget and its crack team of analysts are known for, right? Or at least I thought they were known for. And so what we got, these are the warning signs, guys. Idolizing or looking to emulate other school shootings like Columbine and Sandy Hook. So if you hear people emulating other school shootings, that might be a red flag. That might be a warning sign.
We're back to trench coats?
Yep. Having a history of bad behavior and disciplinary actions in school, like being suspended or expelled. And the last one, being bullied by their classmates, especially if the bullying was persistent. I mean, this is what we got. This is what we got.
It's a waste.
It's a waste. Like, why are we doing this? And so the last part, and this is where the waste of my taxpayer dollars comes in, and this is why I really get offended by stupid studies like this that don't amount to anything. The information from the study will be used in training sessions to help educators and other community members understand warning signs, according to the AP. There are more than 40 training sessions scheduled already, and the Secret Service trained about 7,500 people in 2018. Do you know how worried I got when I read that, Nick? You mean we had to train educators on these warning signs? We had to have more than 40 training sessions for 7,500 people in 2018, and it had to be done by the Secret Service? We could have done this in an email. This is where your tax dollars are going. We have the largest deficit that we've had, and I don't know how ever. Globally, it's a clusterfuck of debt. We've burdened, and I'll get to the funny thing that I found this week that apparently I'm too old to get when it actually comes out, but I caught on this week. We burdened the next generation, the baby boomers did, with all of this debt and all this entitlement and all of this, we deserve this and we deserve that, and you figure out how to pay for it. And this is the stuff that we're still spending taxpayer dollars on. So anyway, it makes me upset. because I want a real study. I want something of substance. I want, how many of these kids were on medications. I want what type of medications. I want a deep dive by people a lot smarter than me, so that we can help prevent some of this stuff in a way that's substantial. I know we can't stop every person that's troubled from shooting up the school. I completely understand that, but we can do better than this. Come on.
And you wonder what they teach at the training and who's getting paid to do that. I'm sure it's some private company that has a government contract to do this training, like Alice. I don't know if we've talked about the Alice training on the show before, but my dad is involved with the training of bus drivers and scheduling of bus routes and such in the county where he lives, and he's got to go to these Alice trainings. Have you heard of it? ALICE? Or have your kids had to partake in any Alice training?
I have not, but I have heard of it from you before one time.
We'll have to put a link up. I'm not intimately familiar, but it's basically they scare the daylights out of all these kids, right? They put them through like active shooter drills and tell them what they got to do. And I'm not sure, and maybe in some cases, and call me crazy, is like give someone who hadn't thought of it an idea before, since you're putting all the kids through it, right? Like maybe some kid had never heard of mass shootings or had the idea to do a mass shootings, and you're just putting millions of kids through drills, like showing them basically what happened. It just, I don't know, it leaves a bad taste in my mouth, and it's not a government thing. So I know they're paying a private company to do all this Alice training because it's like I say, a private company, Alice Training Institute. I'll put a link up, alicetraining.com. And you're right. There's got to be, with the methods of research and analysis that we have these days and the access to data that we have. I mean, we've got to know what these kids' web browsing history was, what their socioeconomic status was, what's the status of gun ownership at their home and how they acquired it. Like all that has to be able to get pulled together, maybe not by the Secret Service, but all the data certainly exists.
When you would think if anybody's got access to the data, it'd be the Secret Service, right? I mean, I listened to the Edward Snowden interview on the Joe Rogan podcast. We linked to it last week or the week before that, and they have access to every keystroke that I've ever touched on my whatever device I've done it on, and so. You would think we could get a more comprehensive study. And again, it's a shell game, people. It's a shell game where the people in power take tax dollars and use it to go and do these sham studies and pay a private company that they probably have ownership stakes in and pocket the money, basically. They take our money and go use it on bullshit like this. So the funny thing that came out of that is I was talking about, the baby boomers and saddling the new generation with debt is the cool new saying amongst the young to the older baby boomers. Have you heard this, Nick?
Okay, boomer.
Okay, boomer is so great. I love that so much. And you know why I love it so much? Because the boomers that get most offended are the same type of boomers that were calling the youngsters snowflakes. Right? And the snowflakes are like, whatever. And now the youngsters are like, okay, boomer. And they're just like outraged and up in arms. And, I think it's hilarious. I think it's funny. The kids, it's fourth turning time. The kids are upset.
I was going to say, it's not a fourth turning at all, right? When the generations are having nicknames for each other and battling for power. That's precisely what it's all about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's talk vaping a little bit. We've talked about how idiotic, more, dumbness from our government, right? How stupid and idiotic it was to ban, all of the vaping devices and flavors and this before, again, we had some real research to back it up because it was just pushing people towards real cigarettes. And that wasn't effective either. And, oh, by the way, real cigarettes actually have a track record of killing a whole ton more people than vaping, right? But it does look like a breakthrough has been made. The CDC says it's made a breakthrough in finding the possible cause of deadly vaping illness. Have you read this yet, Nick?
Not anything since the vitamin E. What do you got?
Vitamin E. That's it. Vitamin E acetate. They now got some specifics. A compound used in supplements, cosmetics, and vaping products was detected in all 29 lung tissue samples from patients that health officials tested. And so the fact that it was in every single one of them, there wasn't anything else, any other toxin that shared that was present, I should say, in everybody's system. So they're calling it a breakthrough. THC was found in 23 of the 29 samples, but that wouldn't account for the other 6. Nicotine was detected in 16 samples. Again, that wouldn't account for the other 13. And so it came, the samples came from 10 different states across the country. And, I read this and I say, okay, this actually is some decent research. There's some teeth to this, right? You can actually make a case here. So at least they have something to follow up on. And then maybe we can get into cigarettes one day and investigate what kills people. Oh, we already know. Got it. Okay. That's all I got. Make me happy, Nick. What do you got?
Man, I mean, it's incredible that, they want to go and ban all these things with stacked up against the amount of people that tobacco and alcohol kills. And we talked about it before, how alcohol has victims as well. When you factor in the drunk driving here in Washington State, they banned the flavored cartridges, both on the tobacco and the THC side. And so all the dispensaries around here have been having like flash sales and, whatever, doorbuster sales to get rid of all their flavored vape products. And, I think we did it months ago on this podcast, but I'll put the link up again. It's sort of like the journey of a vape cartridge and how all this black market stuff came to be, right? Because it's pretty easy to, buy a pallet of these vaporizer cartridges from China and get them delivered, and then buy over-the-counter chemicals, flavors, and oil backers like vitamin E acetate, right, to make these cartridges. And if I'm not mistaken, the people that were getting sick were mostly, if not all, black market cartridges, at least from the stories that were surfing originally. And so I'll put the link up again to how easy it is to generate a cartridge that's not been through testing or vetting, et cetera. And so just a word to the wise, I mean, if you want to vape tobacco alcohol, try to do so with ones with the fewest additives possible, just like eating, right? We've had the organic craze now for years, right? Everybody wants organic berries, organic whatever, bananas, because of the least pesticides and the least amount of additives. Well, the same goes for what you're putting in your lungs is what you're putting in your stomach, as far as I'm concerned. So just be smart.
I love your example, Nick, because I was thinking of a a completely different example. I love that yours was, buy your vapes and your vape cartridges and all of that the same way that you buy, your organic food and everything else. And I was thinking, you should put at least the same amount of due diligence in how you buy your vape and your cartridges and all of that and where you get it from as you do your real drugs, right? Because America is great usually at vetting how to get and source their drugs. At least put that much effort, people. I mean, if you're already doing it for the illegal stuff, and we know America is, right? You should put a little effort on this other stuff because it's going in your body just like everything else.
Correct.
Awesome. Can we talk about Dueling Dinosaurs? Because that sounds like something that would make me smile.
Oh, you're going to love the Dueling Dinosaurs. So
I wish I had a piano, I would play it. There's a bar here called the Dueling Pianos, and it's a great bar. And if I had a piano, I would play it for you.
It's I don't know if I've been to that one, but going to watch dueling pianos is a fun time. Dueling Dinosaurs. So, and this relates to things we do like mineral rights and exploration and stuff, because you can own a piece of property, but you might not own what's under the property, right? Because you can sell the mineral rights just like farmers do in natural gas and oil basins and ranchers do in Nevada for mineral exploration, right? They still farm or ranch cattle on the surface, but they've sold off all or a part of the mineral rights that are under that land. Have I made sense so far?
Absolutely.
So in Montana, just east of where I am, there's a big basin, the Missoula Basin. I think I've talked about this on the podcast, where there was a giant lake, hundreds of thousands or millions of years ago that ice wall broke, all the water washed to the Pacific, created the Missoula Basin and carved out the beautiful scenery in the area where I live now, south of Spokane. So as a result of this big basin, there is oil and gas, there is mineral exploration, and there is also fossils. And so this couple had bought this ranch in the Missoula Basin around Helena, Montana, and they allowed somebody to look for fossils on their ranch. And lo and behold, this fossil hunter named Clayton Phipps, a paleontologist, discovered not one, but 2 giant dinosaurs, one 22-foot long carnivorous theropod and one 28-foot long, that's 9 meters for you Canadians listening.
Well done. Hello to our Canadian friends.
Plant-eating ceratopsian, whatever that is. So here's the point.
Okay.
We'll put up a link.
All right. Thank you.
The people, the husband and wife that own the property were like, great, we're about to G off. We're going to sell these fossils for millions of dollars. $5 million they were going to sell the fossils for. And so I guess the people that are in the market to buy these fossils were like, yeah, sweet, awesome, great fossils. We'll buy them for $5 million. Can you prove to us that you own them? And this is where it gets really interesting. The people that own the ranch only own 1/3 of the mineral rights. When they bought the property back in 2005, I believe it was, part of the deal was that the original owners, the vendors of the property, retained 2/3 of the mineral rights. And so now there's been an ongoing court battle as to what dinosaur bones are. Are they minerals or are they not minerals? Because if they're minerals, then the people that currently own the property only get 1/3 of the money. And the other people, the previous owners, will get 2/3. But if they are not minerals, the current owners will obviously, get all of the money. And so, and this is Bizarro World, one court in Montana ruled that yes, they are part of the Earth's firmament. They're 66 million years old. They are in fact minerals. And then an appeal, of course, and the appeal court says, no, scientifically speaking, they are not minerals. And so we have a decision coming down. It hasn't been issued yet, but the Supreme Court in Montana has heard the arguments, and they will soon be deciding what many a stoner, I'm sure, has argued about in their dorm room. Are dinosaur bones minerals, bro?
That did indeed make me happy. I have an anecdote to that really quick. There was an inmate who had been sentenced to life in prison, and he died while in prison. But minutes later, they revived him, and this guy actually filed an appeal to the court saying that he had served his life sentence because he technically died.
Was he successful, or just
nah? They told him to fuck off. But hey, you got a life sentence. What's the downside, right?
So Gerardo, are dinosaur bones that are 66 million years old minerals or not?
I am not smart enough to answer that question. I am not. I am curious to hear what you think.
It's tough. Yeah, I can see both sides of the arguments, and obviously the judges have seen both sides of the arguments as well. The one who said it was not a mineral, and I like this argument a lot, says that it wasn't fungible, right? You can't go dig up another fossil on the other side of the world and sell it for the same price. Like you can go up and drill for a barrel of oil and sell it for the current going rate, or mine an ounce of gold or sell it for the going rate. So in that respect, it's not a mineral. And I kind of like that argument.
That's great. That's great. Did you get a chance to catch up on the Elon Musk versus David Einhorn feud? No? It's funny. Okay. All right. So David Einhorn is a hedge fund manager that has been famously short Tesla, right? Alleging fraud. And then, we've talked about Elon. I think he's brilliant. I think he's one of the most brilliant people we have on the planet right now, frankly. But, he's notorious for under delivering and taking a long time to deliver on the stuff that he says he's going to deliver, despite giving very specific dates on most of those things. However, he usually does deliver, in fairness to him. Anyhow, he delivered a great quarter and the stock ran up, and David Einhorn was very short the stock. And so Elon tweeted, and we'll put a link up, tweeted a letter that he sent David Einhorn. I'm going to read a part of it. He says, "Dear Mr. Well, he starts it with the emoji of the little yellow emoji dude blowing a kiss to David Einhorn, which I thought was hilarious. And then he says, Dear Mr. Unicorn, fabulous name, by the way. That's what he says, not me. We read your Greenlight Capital Q3 2019 investor letter, in which you make numerous false allegations against Tesla. It is understandable that you wish to save face with your investors, given the losses you suffered from Tesla's successful third quarter, especially since you've had several down years in performance and a sharp drop in assets under management from $15 billion to $5 billion. This is how billionaires flex, by the way. You have our sympathies, he says. We also recognize your desire to feel somehow relevant with your Tesla short position at a time when your friends in the Tesla short community have been noticeably recoiling from the public disclosure, as the world is increasingly recognizing Tesla's contributions to science, safety, and a sustainable environment. To the extent that you have any desire to learn about the amazing progress the people of Tesla are making, and I'll leave the letter there and I'll let y'all read the rest of it later on, because it was absolutely hilarious. But I think it's funny how billionaires fight and how they disagree. This is, very public. And it brings me to my next thing I want to touch on just briefly. Michael Bloomberg, another billionaire, has decided that he wants a shot at the White House. I would love to hear your thoughts on this, because I think this will have a consequence for the election. And for Trump supporters, I think it's a positive. And for everyone else, for everyone else, I think it's a negative. But I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I don't like the Mr. Bloomberg very much as an independent, contrarian-leaning, like to think for myself individual. I think he has been very want to use the government's arm and fist to hammer things down on the public that should be the public's decision, like which size soda they want to consume, for example. And so, exactly right. Him entering the race is splitting the left side and pushes me more towards the center right. I don't want a guy in office who is going to tell me what size soda I have to buy, and that's just one of the things. And so I'm with you. This is a positive for Trump, and very interested to see if he's actually, I'm interested to see how much access his money buys him, as far as being able to get on the debate stage and getting on ballots, et cetera. That's something that a campaign without his resources would not be able to do. Like you said, it's interesting how billionaires flex, right? And that'll be one of the ways. But not a fan of Bloomberg here, and I don't think, I like to think I understand what the silent majority is thinking. I kind of saw Trump winning late in the election cycle in 2016. I sort of saw that materializing, and I don't think the Bloomberg bodes well for the Democratic side.
Agreed. And, in part because Elizabeth Warren seems to have the upper hand right now, and she's, I think, erroneously making the center of her campaign, bashing billionaires, regardless of how they made it, right? She had a back and forth with Bill Gates where, she said, I don't think somebody like that would even sit with me. And, Bill Gates was like, I eradicated malaria. Of course I would sit with you. Which makes her look completely unreasonable, right? And so now a billionaire comes into the race, and I think it's going to take some votes. There's a lot of folks on Wall Street who lean left, who have said, we're not supporting Elizabeth Warren. We will not write checks for this. And so you now have Bloomberg coming in with deep pockets, doesn't need Wall Street support, will get it. I think all it does is divide votes on the left. So I think this is a good thing for Mr. Trump.
Agree. And the New York Times had a great interactive graphic this week about everything that Elizabeth Warren is promising and how much it's going to cost. I would love to put that graphic up for you, because it's a lot of money that she is proposing spending. Agreed. And of which I don't think she's going to be able to cover the cost. It's over $30 trillion in spending, Gerardo.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. It's larger than the current entire national debt.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's why I think the campaign isn't sustainable. And I think that, if the left wants somebody else to take the presidency, they better hope that the right pushes Donald Trump out or convinces him to just step down and go use his last years in the world. He's in his 70s and he doesn't live the healthiest of lifestyle, right? Sleeping with porn stars and drinking soda all day and fast food and all that. He doesn't look like he's got 30 more years left. If I'm Donald Trump, I say, you know what? I'm going to tap out. I'm going to allow someone else to come in and continue the great thing that, I was and the great things that I've done. And, whether you agree with him or not, he says all this stuff. I'm leading the world's greatest economy. It's the greatest. It's the bigliest. You've never seen an economy like this. Nobody has seen it, right? I would just go out on that high horse and, get on the circuit and go find a real $1 billion, which he says he has. Go make another couple of billion and get back to using the influence that you've acquired in the White House to try to dodge a criminal prosecution. But that's just me. Who knows? I think that's the only shot that the left or the country has at Trump not getting reelected is if somebody strokes his ego enough to convince him that his work here is done, right? You can go and be Donald Trump again.
It's not going to happen. And it's not going to happen. And if Warren is the candidate, he's going to wipe the floor with her, not just for the Pocahontas stuff, but for this spending stuff. I'm looking at the chart right now. I'll put a link up to. And so she's proposing over $30 trillion in spending. And the taxes on the 1% and the billionaires, you can talk about that all you want, but that's only $3 trillion of the dollars she's proposing getting the money. So $3 trillion of that $30 trillion would come from taxes on the 1%. You know where the bulk of it would come from? The bulk of it, $8.8 trillion, would come from increased payroll taxes. It's employer taxes. People aren't going to stand for that once the details are revealed. Once there's not 13 people standing on the stage and it's one-on-one, she will get eviscerated for this.
I absolutely agree with you 100%. What else you got, Mr. Hodge? I know you wanted to talk about long-term data storage.
I do, and we can end there. It's not a true feel-good story, but I just think it's fascinating. One, because I don't understand it, and two, because I totally get why it's necessary. So the backdrop is this. We're just producing too much data, whether it's songs and movies or, the 50,000 spreadsheets I have on Google Documents or, whatever it is. We're just producing data. And plus, we'd like to archive all the stuff that we already have, famous texts and Bibles and works of art and all that kind of stuff. And so the problem is now the mediums of storage we have, flash drives and external hard drives, et cetera, while they are greatly improving in the amount of capacity they can hold and their durability, they're not really geared to store things for hundreds or thousands of years if we want to store things, right, for like the future of humanity. And so we're trying to come up now, not me, people smarter than me are coming up with ways to store this that can last for thousands of years and be small enough that it's reasonable to store it. So I just wanted to go over quickly two of the ways we're doing that. One is through fucking DNA. It's crazy, Gerardo. Like they're structuring the DNA helix to form readable code basically, and so they can put DNA basically like in a pill. Think of like one pill of penicillin, like a pill capsule, right? They can put
Donald
DNA
Trump would love that.
to become storage, right? And so I was just like mind blown. I was reading this on the plane the other day. And then the reason I wanted to talk about this is because I saw another article about it just this week, not the DNA, but storing stuff on glass, which I just thought was fascinating. So they're starting to etch tiny little pieces of glass to store these data on, and there's already being tests done where they're trying to store movies by carving certain little tiny patterns. I'm talking like on a nanoscale into glass, and it's just as a Luddite when it comes to coding and developing and those sort of things, I don't even know how an individual could come up, let alone execute on something like that. And so I'll put the links up, but data storage, and I know you remember the floppy disks and then the hard disks and then the CDs and now the thumb drives, but this is like take it 10 levels beyond that. So just thought it was interesting.
No, it's absolutely fascinating. And the other fascinating aspect of it is it's so hard, frankly, not really understanding the consequences of being able to do this, right? And that's one of those conversations where, we got to ask ourselves as a society whether or not we really have a handle on, all the different mutations that could happen as a result of this. And I'm not smart enough to answer that, but I know it is a question that probably should be asked by the people that are smart enough. And I don't know that, I don't know that those questions have been asked. Is it just a ploy to make money and we'll just see where it goes? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question.
No, and it's sort of like just how the way the internet evolved, and now we're sort of in this spot now where everybody's just now starting to say, "Hey, wait a minute, what are these companies doing with all our data?" And hey, what was in that fine print that I just clicked through 1,000 times? You know what I mean? And how that's all coming back now. You mentioned the Snowden interview where he's talking about all the data that Google has, et cetera. Nobody was asking those questions in 1996, 1997, the turn of the millennium. So maybe, and hopefully we've learned our lesson.
I think we'll leave with this. I think the cannabis market either is at a top, and we know that's not the case, or it's at a bottom. So Drake just landed a cannabis pot deal in Toronto. And so Mr. Drake, Mr. Aubrey Graham, has done very well for himself, him and his team, with his outside of music investment. So this is interesting. He inked a deal with Canopy Growth. I'm curious about that. I know that you've long said that you believe, obviously, we're in the early stages of a major trend. I think anybody that's reasonable would agree. I think we all agree that most of the companies will go away because they're not real companies. But if you can identify the real ones, you could probably do well if you have some patience, kind of like the junior resource space right now, right? But yeah, I thought it was interesting. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I mentioned a couple of weeks ago on the podcast, I thought the cannabis sphere was approaching a bottom, and I think the amount of fanfare around this announcement, given the real impact that Drake could probably have, and I'm saying that facetiously, I don't think Drake can impact a multi-billion-dollar company all that much for one way or the other. And there've been numerous other celebrities in this market, from Dan Bilzerian to the gentleman from Kiss to
Martha Stewart, absolutely.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And so they haven't really been driving the announcements and the fanfare that I've seen with this Drake thing. So it's just sort of something to talk about. And the fact that just another celebrity joining is generating the headlines means that there's not much else to talk about, right? And so yeah, firmly believe we're at another short-term bottom in cannabis, which we have seen numerous of, if you remember back before legalization in Canada. And so, like you say, natural evolution of the market. Next year, I think we'll start looking more at like EBITDA stories as opposed to like how many square feet you have under a grow light. Like the metrics are going to change and it's going to become real. And I've been doing my due diligence, so stay tuned.
I like it. Side note, Miss AOC, who had a great Q&A session with Facebook gentleman Mark Zuckerberg. That was great. For all the backlash she gets about being this and being that. Every time I see her questioning somebody, it's the most thorough and piercing questioning that I've seen out of public politics, the stuff we get to see, in a very long time. Anyhow, she is working on a bill that would decriminalize marijuana use, but also the research on psychedelics. And so she said she wants to do so. She's working on legislation that would legalize cannabis in the U.S., but do it in a humane way that doesn't exacerbate so many of the injustices from the war on drugs. I could care less what the politics of you people is. I think that's a great thing.
And Vancouver's ready, baby, because the psychedelic slide decks have been a comment.
I love it. We'll leave it on that note. You're not going to get a stock of the week from me this week. I am going to task you with keeping an eye on the uranium sector next week, and we'll hopefully revisit that with some sort of news, but it should be interesting. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday should be very interesting. Happy Veterans Day to all the veterans out there. I am Gerardo Del Real. This was episode 43 of Bizarro World. Mr. Nick Hodge, any parting words?
Nope. See ya.
Be nice to each other. Be kind to each other. Do something fun that makes you a happy person. Bye, guys.